You remember that slow-motion scene from 300? The one where King Leonidas kicks the Persian envoy down a bottomless pit while yelling, "This is Sparta. Cinematic gold. Muscles glistening, sand flying, testosterone peaking." It's become the rally cry for every gym bro who's ever skipped leg day. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Kindly tell us what you do, where you are watching from, and the time there. We'd love to hear them. We tell the kinds of stories that settle deep into your thoughts, long after the last word. This is not just history. This is sleep therapy, wrapped in blood-stained pages and foggy memories. Tonight, we wander back to the tar and feathering, one of the horrors of the colonial America. So lie back, breathe slow, and listen. But let's be honest. If the Persians were really as soft as Hollywood makes them out to be, the Greeks wouldn't have needed 300 suicidally brave men to stall them at a goat path. The Persian Empire wasn't built on poetry and eyeliner alone. It was also built on fear, strategy, and, when necessary, creative cruelty so disturbing it makes crucifixion look merciful. Enter Scaphism. No, it's not a workout. It's not a diet. And it's definitely not a spa treatment. Scaphism, also charmingly known as the boats, is one of the most horrifyingly inventive ways humans have ever thought to kill each other. And that's saying something, considering we've had millennia to perfect the art. This wasn't some quick beheading or a stab in the back. This was slow, personal, a full-body descent into madness, rot, and insect buffet dining. The kind of punishment designed not only to kill you, but to break your mind, insult your ancestors, and give your enemies something to whisper about for generations. If death was the goal, Scaphism took the long way, through your gut, your skin, your sanity. Let's build the scene. It begins not with violence, but with hospitality. The condemned man is brought forward, not to a gallows, not to a sword, but to two narrow boats, canoe-like slabs of wood, hollowed just enough to fit the human body, are placed one on top of the other. The man is stripped naked, laid down, trapped between the two halves like a meat sandwich. Only his head, hands, and feet are allowed to peek out. Why? So the punishment can breathe. So the outside world can witness the inside horror. At this point, you might think, okay, weird coffin, uncomfortable, but survivable. And that's when the Persians would bring out the milk and honey, buckets of it. The executioners don't just pour it on him, they force-feed it, relentlessly, mouthful after mouthful of milk and honey until the victim's belly swells, digestion fails, and nature begins to protest. The body, overwhelmed by lactose and sugar, does what any body would do under such stress. It loses control. Diarrhea, non-stop, inside the wooden shell. The bowels become their own ecosystem. Still hungry, because now comes the second round of coating. Honey on the skin, the face, the eyelids, the armpits, the groin. Anywhere that breathes, leaks, or sweats. The goal isn't death by sweetness. It's attraction. Specifically, the kind that makes every fly in a 10-mile radius start filing their vacation requests. Then they float the boats into stagnant water. A swamp, a lake, some mosquito-infested backwater with just enough sun to cook a man slowly without killing him outright. And then they wait. Not hours, days, weeks even. That's the genius of Scaphism. It's an execution turned into a living decomposition. You don't just die. You're eaten alive, slowly, methodically, by the smallest armies on Earth. Flies lay eggs in your exposed flesh. Maggots hatch and feed. Wasps sting your eyelids. Your own excrement poisons your skin. Infection settles in like a second skin. And you're fully conscious for most of it. Let's pause here to remember. This was a real thing. Documented. Not myth, not metaphor. Plutarch, the Greek historian, wrote about it in detail. And let's face it, Greeks didn't need help making Persians look bad. So if he was disturbed enough to describe Scaphism, you can bet it wasn't just another Tuesday in the empire. The most famous victim of Scaphism was a Persian soldier named Mithridates. His crime? He killed a man. But not just any man, Cyrus the Younger, brother of King Artaxerxes II. That murder happened during the Battle of Cunaxa, and despite being a soldier following orders, Mithridates boasted too much too soon. The king, not a fan of people taking credit for royal bloodshed, decided to make him an example. And so the boats were prepared. According to Plutarch, Mithridates lasted 17 days. 17. Think about what you were doing 2.5 weeks ago. Now imagine spending every second of that time stuck in your own filth, blistering under the sun, being eaten alive inch by inch, unable to move, crying, hallucinating, praying for death, and knowing that each new bug was a fresh sign of how not dead you still were. There's something almost poetic, if your idea of poetry involves bile and larvae, about the choice of milk and honey. These were symbols of abundance, luxury, even paradise in many ancient cultures. The land of milk and honey was a promise of bliss. In Persia, it became a sentence to hell, a cruel joke told with sticky hands and swarming wings. It wasn't just punishment. It was humiliation, mockery, and psychological destruction. What makes Scaphism so unforgettable isn't just its brutality, it's its intentionality. Every part of it was engineered to prolong suffering. The victim wasn't impaled or set on fire or beheaded. That would have been merciful. No, he was nursed like a spoiled prince into a septic nightmare. Fed like a baby, bathed in sweetness, tucked into a wooden cradle, and then left to rot with dignity. It wasn't about revenge. It was about dominance. About power so secure it could afford to take its time. Empires don't rush. They watch you decay. They let nature do the dirty work, while they sit back and take notes on how long it takes for a human being to become part of the landscape. And the worst part? It worked. Scaphism wasn't just a method of execution, it was a message. A warning nailed to the collective imagination of a people. Disobey, betray, boast, and you won't just die. You'll dissolve. You'll disappear in stages, like meat left out too long. Your story won't be of courage or martyrdom. It'll be about the stench, the pus, the screams no one wants to remember, except us, tonight. Because if you're reading this in bed, congratulations. You're about to dream of buzzing flies, bloated stomachs, and honey dripping into open wounds. You're about to remember that humanity has always been more creative than kind. That the line between civilization and cruelty is often drawn in excrement and syrup. And this is just the beginning. You know that moment when someone asks, "What's the worst way to die?" And the room goes quiet while everyone races to outdo each other with historical trivia? There's always that guy who smugly brings up the Iron Maiden, thinking he's clever. Maybe someone else throws in crucifixion, just to keep it biblical. But let's not kid ourselves, those are bad. Sure, but they end you. Eventually, you pass out from blood loss, shock, or exhaustion. Your mind gets a break before your body does. Scaphism doesn't offer that kindness. It withholds it. If pain is a sentence, Scaphism is the slowest court in existence. So before we go any further, let's answer the question no one really wants to ask. What exactly is Scaphism? Let's be clinical about it for a moment. Strip away the theatrics, the mythology, the horrifying ancient Persian execution method Google search results. What you're left with is this: a process of immobilization, induced decay, and insect-facilitated consumption, designed to stretch human suffering over as many sunrises as possible without killing the victim too quickly. That's the tidy version. Now let's break it down like the body inside the boats. Scaphism begins with containment. 2 boats or hollowed-out logs, flat-bottomed, canoe-shaped, rough-hewn, one on top, one on bottom. The condemned is placed inside like a puzzle piece. Limbs hanging out, head exposed, torso trapped. The idea is to restrict movement but allow access. His arms and legs are free to flail but not escape. His face can still scream, weep, or beg. It's a coffin with air holes, and it's not designed for rest. Next comes force feeding. But this isn't some gentle spoon-to-lips affair. We're talking about gallons of milk and honey, administered day after day in sickening doses. Through funnels, through hands, through whatever gets it into your system. You're bloated, cramping, and still they keep going. Why milk and honey? Because it's the Persian version of poetic irony. The food of kings used to create the digestion of a dying pig. The sugars and lactose overload your gut, override your body's natural limits, and induce unstoppable diarrhea. This isn't just unpleasant. It's the point. Your own body is being turned against you. And here's where the genius or madness really starts to shine. You're now lying in your own waste, marinating in it, breathing it in, feeling it seep into every open pore. And while you're busy trying not to choke on the stench of your own fermented organs, the executioners return with the second phase of treatment, external honey application. They don't just pour it on. They lather. They work it into the skin, hairline, armpits, groin, eyelids, between fingers and toes. Every place that can itch, sting, or blister gets a nice, thick coat. You are now a human cinnamon roll for the insect kingdom. A living trap for flies, ants, wasps, beetles, and maggots, each summoned by the promise of sweetness and decay. And then, they set you adrift. Not on the sea. That would be merciful. They float you out into swamps, stagnant rivers, slow-moving lakes. Any body of water with enough sun to cook and enough stillness to breed mosquitoes the size of your thumb. The heat rises. The honey melts and runs. Your sweat pools. Your skin splits. And the insects arrive like an army that's been waiting for their cue. Flies first. They land, taste, and decide to stay. They crawl into your eyes, your mouth, your nose. They lay eggs in your ears. Maggots hatch. Wasps sting your lips for fun. Ants chew soft flesh, and spiders build webby shrines on your face. You can scream, but no one's coming. You can flail, but you won't get far. The boats don't rock. They absorb. And while all this is happening, you're still alive. You're still fed, watered, sustained. Because the point isn't to let you die. It's to keep you dying for as long as nature will allow. Let's pause for a moment. This isn't just a grotesque murder ritual. It's a system. Every piece of the process is connected. Every substance chosen has a role. The boats restrict escape. The milk wrecks the gut. The honey attracts the devourers. The sun accelerates the rot. Nothing is random. It's an execution method with layers like an onion dipped in filth. The victim, at this point, experiences several simultaneous kinds of agony. Gastrointestinal collapse. Unchecked diarrhea leads to dehydration, infection, skin erosion, and sepsis. The smell alone could kill a weaker man. Neurological torment. Hallucinations begin. Pain warps the mind. Prolonged exposure to light, heat, stench, and hunger strips away reality until nothing makes sense. Dermal degradation. Skin peels. Sores erupt. Insects chew and burrow. The body becomes landscape, then food source, then nesting ground. Psychological disintegration. Helplessness metastasizes into madness. You're no longer a person. You're a dish. Still think the Iron Maiden is the worst? The brilliance of Scaphism is that it leverages natural forces. It doesn't need guillotines or blades. Just 2 planks, some honey, a swamp, and patience. Turns the world against you, your body, the sun, the bugs. It lets you reflect on your life in excruciating detail. Every mistake, every betrayal, every decision that led to the moment you're bloated, sticky, sunburnt, and screaming into reeds while ants tunnel into your eyelids. And here's the kicker. It worked. People feared it. They whispered about it. They obeyed because of it. That's the difference between punishment and spectacle. Most executions are about the victim. Scaphism? It was about everyone else. The people watching. The ones hearing about it. The ones who might think of crossing the king. It's no accident that this method was reportedly used on traitors, deserters, and boasters. People who threaten not just order, but ego. The kind of people who needed to vanish publicly. Not disappear in the night, but rot in daylight until the land itself forgot they'd been human. Let's not forget the logistics. You need guards, attendants, people to deliver the milk, clean the vomit, turn the boats, adjust the positioning. It's a commitment, a ritual. This wasn't a one-time show. It was a performance of power, a declaration of what the state could and would do to anyone who got clever. You weren't just dying. You were demonstrating. And when you finally went still, when the bugs had eaten through to the bone and the rot had reached your brain, the empire would still be watching. satisfied, and what happens after? Nothing. Your name becomes a caution. Your story, a warning. Your remains? Probably dumped in the same swamp. Maybe fed to fish. Maybe burned. But no burial. No prayers. No peace. You didn't die. You dissolved. That's the legacy of Scaphism. And the truly twisted part? This wasn't even considered torture by Persian standards. It was justice. A legal sentence. A punishment meted out by kings who built gardens and palaces, studied stars, and wrote poems about spring. The same hands that held scepters also ordered honey to be slathered into a traitor's armpits. It's a reminder that civilization doesn't mean civility, that progress doesn't mean empathy, that sometimes the more advanced a society becomes, the more refined its methods of cruelty. You'd think the person who invented Scaphism would be a frothing lunatic. Someone locked in a cave, drawing twisted images in their own blood. But no, the mind behind this punishment wasn't some back-alley sadist with a bone fetish. It belonged to royalty, specifically King Artaxerxes II of Persia, one of the most powerful men on earth at the time. A man who wore gold, read poetry, consulted astrologers, and had servants fan his grapes. A man who didn't just rule by force, he ruled by fear. And nothing instilled fear quite like turning your enemies into a living insect buffet. Let's set the historical table. The Achaemenid Empire at its peak was massive. We're talking about a territory that stretched from the Balkans to the Indus Valley, swallowing up cultures, gods, and languages like a continent-sized black hole. Ruling over that kind of sprawl required more than just swords and treaties. It required a psychology of dominance. Something that could pierce through borders, break men's spirits before their bones, and leave a stink in history's nose long after the bodies were gone. Artaxerxes II understood this, and he didn't just permit cruelty, he commissioned it. The most famous use of Scaphism, the one that made it into the history books, happened during his reign. And the target? A man named Mithridates, not a rebel, not a rival prince. Just a soldier, one who made the mistake of opening his mouth at the wrong time. Let's rewind. Artaxerxes had a younger brother named Cyrus the Younger, who, like all younger brothers with a sense of entitlement and access to an army, decided he wanted the throne. In 401 BCE, Cyrus launched a rebellion and marched on Babylon with a force of Greek mercenaries. The battle that followed, at Cunaxa, was bloody and chaotic. And in the middle of it, Cyrus was killed. Not by a general, not by a royal assassin, but by a Persian soldier, Mithridates. Now, you'd think the guy who killed the usurper would be given a medal, maybe even a nice villa with a view. But court politics don't work that way. You don't just kill a prince and brag about it. Especially not when the king, Artaxerxes, is still pretending that his brother's death was a noble accident, a tragic twist of fate, a necessary evil. He doesn't want the world thinking some grunt ended the rebellion. That would make him look weak. So when Mithridates ran his mouth in public, boasting that he struck the blow that ended Cyrus, the king smiled and ordered Scaphism. That's the royal mind at work. Not a mind that reacts in rage. Not a wild animal, but something colder, something calculating. A man who heard a soldier speak truth and decided to crush that truth so completely that even the maggots would gag on it. This wasn't about punishment. It was about rewriting the narrative. The king wanted control of the story, and Mithridates had stepped into the margins with a pen. But Artaxerxes didn't invent cruelty. He inherited it. The Persian elite had long mastered the art of psychological warfare. Their empire, after all, was stitched together by conquest. They ruled over Greeks, Babylonians, Egyptians, Scythians, each with their own gods, customs, and thresholds for terror. And to keep the peace, they didn't just build roads and palaces. They made examples. A disloyal satrap, flayed alive and nailed to the city wall. A rebel city, raised and salted. A traitor in the ranks. Scaphism, long, slow, and unforgettable. Because let's be honest, the Persians didn't need everyone to love them. They just needed them to obey. And Scaphism was obedience weaponized. Now picture the men who carried it out. The royal executioners. You don't apply for a job like that. You're born into it. trained, groomed, taught not just how to kill but how to extend death. These weren't brutes swinging axes. These were artists of decay. They knew exactly how many days a man could last in a swamp, how much honey it took to draw wasps without suffocating the victim, how often to ladle milk into a screaming mouth to keep him alive, but not sane. Imagine the precision, the pride, the ritual. Some scholars believe Scaphism had ceremonial elements. It wasn't a back-alley execution, it was displayed, public, a warning with legs sticking out. And the executioners? They followed the script. If the victim passed out, they revived him. If he dehydrated, they gave water. If the bugs lost interest, they added more honey. They weren't killing a man, they were curating his destruction. And all of it came from the top. Because the real horror of Scaphism isn't in the rot, or the maggots, or the screams. It's in the intention. The fact that this wasn't invented by madmen in caves. It was invented by kings in palaces. People who wore rings, sipped wine, quoted Zoroaster, and still thought it was acceptable to turn human beings into compost on purpose. It's easy to write off ancient cruelty as a kind of primitive violence, as if people didn't know better. But the Persians did know. They knew the value of life. They practiced medicine, built aqueducts, studied the stars. They believed in divine order, moral codes, and cosmic justice. And yet, they still carved out a space in their empire for the boats. A space where morality was put on hold so that a message could be sent. And the message was simple. We don't just defeat our enemies. We erase them. Think about it. Most punishments leave a body behind. Something to bury. Something for mourners to cling to. Scaphism doesn't. It degrades the person. Breaks him down into something that can't be buried with honor. There's no grave for Mithridates. No tomb. Just 17 days of slowly vanishing. He wasn't killed. He was undone. And Artaxerxes? He kept ruling. For 40 more years. History remembers him as a reformer, a statesman, a long-lived monarch. But tucked into his biography is a footnote soaked in honey and blood. A line that whispers, he ordered Scaphism. And really, that's what power is, isn't it? Not how many lands you conquer or how many coins bear your face, but how thoroughly you can unmake a man for speaking out of turn. Artaxerxes didn't need to scream or rant. He didn't need a spectacle. He needed a swamp, a soldier, and time. There's a reason it started with milk and honey. Not whips, not fire, not the blade. Milk and honey. Symbols of abundance, comfort, fertility, even paradise. They were sacred, revered, referenced in holy texts and imperial banquets alike. But in Persia's darkest sentence, they weren't blessings. They were bait, and you, the condemned, were the trap. By the time the first drop touched your lips, your fate was already sealed. The executioners weren't trying to nourish you. They weren't showing mercy. They were preparing you to fall apart from the inside out. Let's begin at the mouth. You're already bound, stripped naked, forced into the bottom half of a wooden shell shaped like a narrow boat. Your arms are pinned, but your head is exposed, so they can see your eyes as they pour the milk down your throat. Not just a cup, gallons, repeatedly. Your lips are slick, your chin is dripping, and your stomach starts to cramp before the first wave of nausea hits. The milk is warm, or maybe slightly sour. Maybe the jar was left out in the sun on purpose. But none of that matters because you're still drinking, still swallowing, still being filled against your will. Then comes the honey, not just fed but smeared, over your face, your eyelids, your chest, your armpits, between your fingers, behind your ears. They make a point of it. They rub it in, sometimes with their bare hands, sometimes with stiff, rough brushes that leave your skin raw beneath the sweetness. You squirm, but you're trapped. All you can do is clench your teeth as they work the honey into every crevice like funeral balm. It's not over. They lift the top half of the boat and lower it onto you like a lid. You are now cocooned between wood, soaked and bloated. Your arms, legs, and face remain visible, not out of pity, but necessity. You are no good to them dead. The punishment hasn't even begun. And already your body has started to betray you. All that milk, the lactose, the sugar, the sheer quantity, wreaks havoc inside your gut. The stomach rebels first, turns, contracts, begins to cramp, but you are not allowed to vomit. Your position makes it difficult, and the executioners are careful. They keep your head tilted just enough to swallow, just enough to suffer. The intestines are next. Milk moves through you like a flood. It hits the colon like fire through dry brush. You are about to release everything. There is no relief. You are sitting in a carved-out cavity, but your own waste has nowhere to go. Puddles beneath you. It sloshes between the boat planks. It seeps into your skin. And that skin, now honey-slick and porous, accepts it like a second layer. This is not accidental. This is what they wanted. A rotting pool of digestion, fermenting beneath your body, heating in the sun. But they don't stop feeding you. Twice a day, sometimes more, they return. They bring more milk, more honey. If you refuse to drink, they pinch your nose until you open your mouth. If you spit it up, they wipe it from your chin and pour it right back in. The goal is not nutrition. It is maintenance. You must stay alive long enough to decay. Eventually, your digestion becomes constant. You lose control. You lose awareness of when it happens. Your belly distends. Your skin begins to itch. Blisters rise in places you can't see. The smell, sour, sweet, and septic, clings to the air like smoke. It warns the living. It invites everything else. Because now the real guests arrive. First come the flies. They buzz around your face, land on your nostrils, lay eggs in the corners of your eyes. They explore the honey and waste, unsure where one ends and the other begins. They aren't picky. They dig into open skin. They crawl inside your ears. They deposit larvae in your gums. Then the beetles, black-bodied, thick-legged, drawn to rot. They chew. They burrow. They don't wait for you to die. They don't care if you scream. Some climb up your arms and nest beneath your fingernails. Others explore deeper. The sun beats down. The heat rises from the wooden shell, turning your excrement into steam, your honey coat into a glaze. You begin to blister. Your lips crack. The corners of your mouth split. But every time your eyes begin to dim, a new wave of milk sloshes against your throat and drags you back to the living. This isn't execution. This is suspension. You are not allowed to die, not yet. The milk has made you soft. The honey has made you fragrant. The waste has made you fertile. Your body is now a host, and the parasites are checking in. And your mind? It doesn't go gently. Hallucinations come early. The hunger, the fever, the smell. It all warps reality. You think you hear footsteps. You think someone is watching. You beg. You curse. You try to pray. Then you forget what words are. You speak in syllables, fragments, nonsense. You forget your name. You forget why you're here. You forget that you were once a man. All you remember is milk. You feel it curdling inside you. You feel it dripping from your chin even when it isn't. You taste it in your sleep. You dream of rivers made of honey and lakes full of waste. Insects swim in your dreams. They lay eggs in your throat. You choke on them. You wake up and it's all still true. At this point, you might think the worst is over. That your body has adapted. That the feeding will stop. That your executioners will be satisfied. They're not. They are committed. This is their craft. And they are disciplined. They clean around your exposed face so it remains visible. They wipe your lips before pouring more milk. They keep track of your pulse, your breathing, your moaning. If you go quiet for too long, they rouse you. Because if Scaphism fails, it sends the wrong message. This isn't about death. It's about performance. You are the centerpiece of a morality tale written in bile and buzzing. The feeding is Act 1. It is what ensures the story can stretch across days, weeks, sometimes more. The longer it lasts, the louder it speaks. And so you drink. You drink until your gut feels like it's tearing open. You drink until your sweat starts to smell like rot. You drink until the only thing worse than being fed is being forgotten. But they won't forget. They will remember every detail. They will pass it down. Fathers will tell sons. Servants will whisper about it across kingdoms. And somewhere, in some golden hall, a king will listen, pleased, knowing that his enemy didn't just die, he spoiled. If you've ever sat in a hot room with a single fly that refused to leave your face alone, you already understand the first 5 seconds of hell. But Scaphism didn't offer just a fly. It offered thousands. It invited everything that crept, crawled, laid eggs, bit, burrowed, and thrived on flesh in transition. You're not in a grave. You're not even on solid ground. You're floating, barely buoyant, half submerged in a scum-topped pond or a sunlit marsh, the water still but thick with rot and mosquitoes. Around you, reeds, silence, and the droning buzz of wings. Above you, the merciless sun. Below you, your own waste fermenting into a syrup that sticks to your skin like a second death. This is the part of Scaphism most people skip over when telling the story. They mention the milk. They remember the honey. They laugh nervously about the boats. But what comes next isn't poetic. It isn't cinematic. It doesn't fit into 3 neat acts. What comes next is insect logic, biological hunger, slow motion feeding. And you're the buffet. The first arrivals are flies. Always the flies. They come in waves. Black, green, metallic, fat with eggs and fast with purpose. They don't even hesitate. They recognize the scent. They know exactly where to land. First on your lips, then in your nostrils, then in the corners of your eyes where moisture gathers. They crawl. They swarm. They lick and feed and nest. At first, you twitch. You flinch. Maybe you even manage to shake your head. But you're weak, dehydrated, half-cooked by the sun. And the honey that coats your skin only tightens as it dries, pinning the flies to you like some sick badge of honor. Then come the eggs, laid in clusters, tiny white grains buried in your eyelashes, between your toes, in the folds of your genitals. Flies don't ask for consent. They lay and leave, and within hours the eggs hatch. Larvae emerge, blind, hungry, with teeth, maggots. They burrow not deep, just far enough, into open wounds, into sweat glands clogged with honey and pus. They eat the soft stuff first, the tissue that's already damaged from friction and heat. Then they move inward. They don't stop. They never stop, because your body is still alive, and that means it's still fresh enough. By day 2, your skin is bubbling, not from heat but from motion. Tiny movements beneath the surface. Blisters you didn't notice now burst, spilling fluid that smells like rot and tastes worse. Your fingernails are lifting from their beds. Your ankles are swollen. You begin to hallucinate insects that aren't even there. But some of them are. Beetles arrive next. Bigger, stronger, with mandibles. They're not picky. If it's wet, they bite it. If it oozes, they drink it. If it twitches, they latch on and hold until the twitching stops. They wedge themselves into your ears. You scream, but your throat is so dry that the sound comes out hoarse, like a broken whistle. Wasps hover over you, not for the flesh but for the sugar. The honey that once made you a royal delicacy now makes you a nectar trap. They land on your cheeks, your eyelids. They crawl inside your mouth while you sleep. You try to spit, but the honey has glued your lips half shut. A sting blooms inside your throat. It swells. Breathing becomes a conscious act, one you're losing the strength for. Ants form a line from the bank to your exposed feet. They march across your shins. They find the cracks in your skin. They don't even need the honey anymore. You're leaking enough from every pore to make your body their pantry. And then there are the unknowns. There's always something in the water. Something nameless that burrows into cuts or lays eggs beneath your nails. Water scorpions, mites, flatworms, parasites, nature's cleanup crew. They don't move in packs. They move in silence. They enter places no one ever thinks about until they start to itch. Now you're not just in pain. You're dissolving. You feel your skin loosening, your flesh sagging. Places that once stung now go numb. You don't know whether that's mercy or the beginning of nerve death. Your face is no longer your own. It's an open pasture for winged things to rest. Your cheeks are wet, not from tears but from insect saliva and larval slime. And it never stops. Because the executioners return twice a day just to keep you alive. Just to make sure the eating continues. They feed you more milk, more honey. They tilt your head up. They speak calmly. They don't flinch at the stench. They wipe your face with rough cloth. Not to clean you, but to clear space for more consumption. They aren't killing you. They're preserving you. You are no longer a person. You are a process. Something happening in stages. Skin, muscle, nerve, bone. You are meat left in the sun, but kept just moist enough to stop it from drying out. You're being slow-cooked by nature and sustained by men with ladles and orders. By day 4, you stop struggling. By day 6, your voice is gone. By day 8, you stop dreaming. Somewhere around day 10, you forget your name. Not from amnesia, but because it no longer applies. Names are for people. You are now a vessel, a nest, project. The insects don't know your title. The executioners don't care. The only identity you have left is function. You are the example, and every man who passes the swamp, every servant who whispers to another, every child who catches a glimpse of your twitching frame in the distance. They don't ask what you did. They ask who you offended. Because no one cares about guilt in this part of the story. Guilt is irrelevant. Process is everything. The insects don't ask questions. They don't care if you were innocent. They're just doing what they were made to do. So they eat, and they eat, and they eat, until the boats sink. Or until your organs collapse. Or until someone finally forgets to feed you. Not because you were forgiven, but because you became unrecognizable. That's the thing about Scaphism. It didn't erase your body. It let everything else do it for them. You'd think the body would give up. That there'd be a natural point where the heart simply says, "We're done. And let's go." But biology doesn't work that way. It's built to survive. Even when every part of you is pleading to be released, the systems keep going. The pulse stutters. The lungs wheeze. The gut churns. The brain, starved, infected, and glitching, refuses to shut down. This is where Scaphism goes from cruel to cosmic comedy. Because the deeper into the punishment you go, the more your own body refuses to participate in your escape. By this point, say day 6 or 7, your skin has turned against you completely. The layers of honey and sweat and feces that initially clung to your flesh have fused into a crust. In some places, it cracks. In others, it liquefies. Beneath it, your real skin has started to rot. Not metaphorically, literally. Tissue necrosis. A slow-motion decomposition without death. You are a leaking fruit in a wooden bowl, splitting under its own weight, too soft to hold its shape but somehow still breathing. Every time your heart pumps, it spreads the infection a little farther. Let's start with the skin. The pressure sores are deep now. From lying in the same position for days without movement, without relief. They form around the base of your spine, your shoulders, your heels, anywhere that bone meets wood. The sores are black-rimmed, swollen. They weep constantly. At first, the discharge is clear, then cloudy, then yellow, then green. Finally, it turns thick and brown. You don't notice anymore because there are more pressing issues, like the fact that your genitals have begun to slough off. The moisture, the honey, the excrement, it's all been pooling there. And now, the soft tissue has given up. It breaks apart in clumps. Your thighs stick together with pus. When you shift, if you can shift, you feel something tear. You scream, but it's hoarse. Your vocal cords are swollen. There's a wasp sting buried in the roof of your mouth. You can still taste it. You can't tell anymore what's real and what's a hallucination. You think you saw a hand reach into the water yesterday. You tried to cry out. No one came. Or maybe they did. Maybe it was a guard. Maybe it was a dream. Time is broken now. The days blur. You sleep in fragments. Micronaps between pulses of agony. Each time you drift off, something bites you awake. An ant. A maggot. A mosquito laying eggs in the corner of your eye. Your left eye is sealed shut now. The pus dried thick across the lashes, and you never got it open again. The right one is barely functional. The whites are yellow, the pupil cloudy. Vision fades in and out like a faulty lantern. You can't see your hands, but you can feel them. Or at least you could. Now, sensation flickers. Sometimes your fingers burn. Sometimes they feel cold. Sometimes they vanish altogether, like they no longer belong to you. The skin under your nails is loose. When flies crawl beneath the beds, you barely notice. You don't know how many days it's been. 10? 12? The executioners come less often now. You hear them, boots on the shoreline, voices muttering. The milk still arrives, but it's not as warm. They force it down your throat. You swallow. You've stopped gagging. The taste is meaningless. Could be honey or blood or rot. You've swallowed it all before. What's strange is what remains. Your brain, in flashes, still works. Between the fever spells and the blank hours, there are seconds, brief, horrible seconds, where you remember who you are. You remember your mother's face, the way she used to braid your hair before temple. You remember a song you hummed when sharpening your sword. You remember laughing once, laughing so hard you couldn't breathe. That's the cruelest part. You don't get to forget. You don't get to die clean. The rot doesn't wipe you away instantly. It lets you feel what you've lost. You remember your name. You remember the charge. You remember the look on the king's face when he signed the order. You even remember thinking, briefly, naively, that maybe he'd change his mind. He didn't. Now the water beneath the boat is black. It bubbles occasionally. You think you saw something move inside. A snake, maybe, or a thick eel. It brushed against your side. You didn't react. What would be the point? You haven't spoken in 2 days. Your tongue is cracked. Your lips bled yesterday. You felt them split and now they won't close. Your teeth are loose. One came out when you tried to chew the last honey-soaked fig they forced between your jaws. They're not even pretending to keep you alive anymore. Now it's just maintenance. A ladle to the lips. A cloth over the eyes. A bucket of honey dumped on the wounds. They don't make eye contact. You're not a person. You're a performance that's gone on too long. And the audience is tired. No one comes to watch anymore. The swamp is quiet. The guards leave quickly. You wonder if they're hoping you'll die soon, so they don't have to keep returning to this stinking corner of the empire, to this human-shaped lesson that's overstayed its purpose. Your ears are full of pus. Your hair is gone. Your chest is sunken. The insects no longer swarm with the same enthusiasm. There's less left to eat. The rot has outpaced the feeding. You're not dead, but you are past function. And still, somehow, still, you breathe. Every inhale scrapes your ribs from the inside. Every exhale is a whisper of who you used to be. If you were lucky, someone would come with a blade. A final cut. A mercy. But Persia didn't believe in mercy for men like you. Not when the message still had ink. So you lie in the boats. Half-eaten. Half alive. A slow, sagging monument to the empire's need to make a point so clearly, so violently, that it would echo through history. Not in words. Not in scrolls, but in the silence that follows 17 days of rot. If death were a competition, humans would be the undefeated champions of innovation. We've spent millennia crafting new ways to snuff each other out. Some fast, some flashy, some that make you question whether evolution was such a great idea after all. The guillotine, crucifixion, burning at the stake, dismemberment, flaying, boiling, drawing and quartering, impalement. Execution has never lacked imagination. But among all these methods, these barbed, fiery, knife-heavy inventions, Scaphism still stands alone. Not because it kills faster, not because it's bloodier, but because it kills slower, with more precision, and with nature itself enlisted as the executioner. Let's line them up, one by one, and watch Scaphism hold court. Crucifixion. Let's start with the crowd favorite. Crucifixion is practically a household name thanks to Roman PR and every Renaissance painter with a brush. It was brutal, a public display meant to humiliate as much as hurt. Victims died from exhaustion, suffocation, dehydration, and exposure. Could take days. It was a warning, a spectacle. But here's the difference. Crucifixion is static. It's a slow bleed out in the sun, a collapse into stillness. It's excruciating, but it's largely about the weight of the body working against itself. Muscles fail. Breath slips. Eventually, the heart gives out. Scaphism? Scaphism takes the slow pace of crucifixion and adds internal collapse, external invasion, and a feeding schedule. The body doesn't just sag, it ferments. Bugs don't just circle, they participate. Your organs don't just fail, they swell, leak, and spread disease through every inch of flesh. Crucifixion makes a man suffer. Scaphism makes a man disintegrate in real time. Impalement. Impalement. The signature of Vlad the Impaler, history's most dramatic overachiever. A sharp stake inserted through the body, often starting from below, and then hoisted upright where gravity does the rest. It's horrifying. There's blood. There's screaming. There's the slow slide of a body along polished wood. If done expertly, it could take hours or even days to die. But impalement is still a singular event. One decisive wound. One act of violation. Once you're on the stake, your fate is sealed. You're not being managed or adjusted or fed through the process. Scaphism is impalement without the climax. The suffering on a loop, adjusted daily. It doesn't end when the spike finds your spine. It ends when your insides have turned to soup, your skin to sponge, and your screams to gurgles. Flaying alive. One of the most viscerally disturbing methods of torture ever recorded. The skin is peeled away in strips, layer by layer. In some accounts, they start at the scalp. Others begin at the feet. The victim often dies from shock, blood loss, or infection shortly after the process begins. There's no denying the pain. Flaying is the executioner's equivalent of making a man watch himself unravel. But it's also manual, reliant on the stamina and skill of the torturer. And in many cases, the victim is dead long before the skin is gone. Scaphism doesn't need a skilled hand. It doesn't need fresh blades. It doesn't need human intervention at all, once set in motion. It lets the world eat you, and you're awake for days. Your skin doesn't just get removed. It's digested by things that hatch on your body. Flaying is human brutality. Scaphism is ecosystem brutality. Burning at the stake. Now this one's loud. It draws a crowd. The smoke, the flames, the screaming. It's all part of the drama. A witch, a heretic, a rebel, all going up in crackling agony. The fire eats quickly at first. Nerves fire off like fireworks. Then the pain goes numb. The brain boils. Death comes not from the fire, but from the inhalation of flame and smoke. It usually ends in under an hour. Scaphism would laugh if it had lips left. Because scaphism is what happens when someone looks at burning alive and says, "Too quick." There's no fire in scaphism. No clean end. Just slow, wet, crawling misery. The body doesn't burn. It rots. The heat doesn't come from flames. It comes from fever, from sunstroke, from bacterial warfare waged inside your own guts. Burning is flashy. Scaphism is unrelenting. Drawing and quartering. This one's a medieval multi-tool of violence. It starts with hanging almost to death, followed by disembowelment, castration, and then finally having your body pulled into pieces by horses or machines. It's messy, it's cruel, and it's usually over within an hour or two. The show is violent, the politics are loud, but the body goes quickly. The brain can't handle that level of trauma for long. But in scaphism, there's no snapping of limbs, no swift betrayal by your organs. There's just you, floating in your own offal, waiting for the bugs to finish what the empire started. There's no dramatic final moment, just a soft decay that becomes quieter by the hour. You don't make history with one last scream. You fade one cell at a time. Boiling, simple, effective. Drop someone into a cauldron and let the heat rise. They cook alive. Skin peels, muscles bubble, eyes explode. It's horrific, but it's quick. 10 to 15 minutes, tops, before death takes over. It's a chef's execution. Scaphism says, this is what happens when you make the wrong person feel small. So what makes scaphism worse than all of these? It doesn't just kill. It unravels. It doesn't just hurt. It lingers. It doesn't make you scream for mercy. It makes you scream for silence. It doesn't execute the body. It slow cooks the soul. You don't die in a moment. You die in chapters. Your brain watches your flesh fall away. Your mouth drinks your own ruin. Your blood stays warm long enough to boil from the inside. Other methods end you. Scaphism ends the memory of you. It degrades, humiliates, and erases all at once. And the worst part? When it's finally over, when the last breath rattles out of your collapsed chest, when the bugs lose interest, when the guards stop coming and the birds take over, there's no body left to bury, no skin to honor, no face to name. There's just wood, stained dark, a pond with a foul patch that never quite clears, and a silence that sticks to your throat like spoiled milk. His name was Mithridates, a Persian soldier, not a traitor, not a war criminal, not a rebel prince with dreams of usurping the throne. Just a man who did his job too well, and then made the mistake of telling people about it. If you remember nothing else from this entire descent into rot, remember this: Mithridates was punished not for what he did, but for what his success implied. It all began with a war between brothers. In 401 BCE, Cyrus the Younger launched a rebellion against his brother, King Artaxerxes II, ruler of the vast and paranoid Achaemenid Empire. Cyrus was ambitious, charismatic, a favorite of his mother. He wasn't supposed to be king, but that didn't stop him from trying. He gathered a force of Greek mercenaries, battle-hardened hoplites with no allegiance beyond their pay, and marched against Babylon, the empire's core. The two armies clashed at the Battle of Cunaxa, a chaotic melee where lines blurred, loyalty wavered, and arrows didn't care about bloodlines. And somewhere amid the dust and shouting, Cyrus fell. A spear, a blade, counts vary, but the credit? That landed on Mithridates, a soldier, Persian, loyal, competent. He claimed he had struck the blow that killed Cyrus. Maybe it was pride. Maybe he wanted recognition. Maybe he just wanted to tell his friends that he'd helped secure the empire's future. What he didn't realize was that his king, Artaxerxes II, wasn't ready to share the spotlight. You have to understand the context. Artaxerxes had barely survived the rebellion. His brother had nearly replaced him. The throne was still warm from danger. The last thing he wanted was for some mid-rank soldier to become the unofficial hero of the story. It weakened him. It made the victory feel accidental. It made Cyrus's death feel like bad luck, not royal authority. So the king made a decision. Petty, careful, colossally cruel decision. He summoned Mithridates. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. There was no spectacle. Just the quiet judgment of a man who'd survived a power struggle and now wanted to make sure everyone remembered who really won. Mithridates was sentenced to Scaphism, and the record survives. We know this because of Plutarch, the Greek historian and biographer. His writings often mixed legend and fact, but in this case, the details are too precise to dismiss. He tells us Mithridates was sentenced to die between boats, covered in milk and honey, and left to rot in public view. He lasted 17 days. 17. Let that sit. That's 2.5 weeks. That's a man, stripped of rank and name, turned into an insect hotel, kept just alive enough to suffer every morning, every noon, and every bitter, swarming night. 17 days of bloating, blistering, and bleeding. 17 days of diarrhea, vomiting, hallucination, and dehydration. 17 days of insect eggs hatching inside his body. 17 days of his flesh separating from the bone. 17 days of being spoon-fed the very ingredients that would break him apart. Plutarch didn't have the stomach to give us more than that. He told the story, then moved on. The horror was in the duration, in the fact that it wasn't a quick death or even a theatrically gory one. It was a long wait for rot. No blade, no flame, just the sick math of biology and humiliation. Mithridates wasn't buried. Not that we know of. There's no grave, no shrine. His name barely makes it into most histories. He was erased not just physically but narratively, because that's what Scaphism was really about: erasure through exposure. A man turned into a warning, a lesson, a mistake you don't repeat. And what did the empire gain? Fear, control, silence. Mithridates didn't just die. He vanished. By day 5, he likely couldn't speak. By day 10, he was probably unrecognizable. By day 17, there may not have been enough of him left to name. The guards who tended to him would have seen it all. They would have ladled milk into his mouth while flies swarmed his open sores. They would have wiped his face while maggots burrowed into his eyelids. They would have stood in the stench, watching as his body swelled, then shriveled, then collapsed inward like a house eaten from the foundation up. Did they speak to him? Did they whisper apologies? Or did they look away and count the days, waiting for permission to stop? We'll never know, but someone kept the count. 17 days. That's what Scaphism demanded. That's how long a man could last when his will was strong, his body young, and his king desperate to prove a point. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about optics. The king needed people to see what happens when the story gets away from the throne. When someone, anyone, tries to own a narrative that doesn't belong to them. Mithridates took credit. Artaxerxes took everything else. And the empire? It remembered the silence. Because when you die by Scaphism, there is no redemption arc. No final speech. No heroic death. There is only milk. And honey. And 17 days of undoing. Let's talk about public image. The Achaemenid Persian Empire liked to present itself as elegant, orderly, wise. An enlightened monarchy with clean roads, clever irrigation, multilingual decrees, and just enough tolerance to keep half the known world paying taxes without torching the capital. It worked mostly. Persia was respected, feared, and even admired from Babylon to the Nile. They were poets, mathematicians, astronomers, architects. Their kings didn't just conquer, they curated. They built Persepolis, for heaven's sake. A city carved into cliffs, flanked by stairways wide enough for horses and kings to climb side by side. Relief carvings in the halls show ambassadors from every corner of the empire bringing gifts. No blood, no chains, just order. But here's the issue. You don't get to sell yourself as the world's enlightened empire while quietly slow-cooking your enemies in excrement and insects. You can't hold a ziggurat dedication ceremony one day and then duct tape a man between two boats the next. It sends mixed signals. And yet, that's exactly what ancient Persia did. This was an empire obsessed with its image. The Achaemenids pioneered propaganda before the word existed. They had royal scribes, public inscriptions, and meticulously edited versions of history carved in 3 languages into stone walls for all to see. If a battle went poorly, they rephrased it. If a king cried, the record said he meditated. If someone dared to challenge the line of succession, the official scrolls simply said they disappeared. So why would a state this polished allow something as grotesque and undignified as Scaphism to exist? Because Scaphism wasn't meant to be hidden. It was part of the message. The Persians didn't use it often. That's important. They didn't need to. A method like Scaphism only had to happen once every few decades for the ripples to stretch across generations. It was the nuclear option. The thing they pulled out when someone needed to be not just punished, but obliterated spiritually. Not killed. Deleted. The empire liked its art clean and its punishments filthy. That contrast wasn't a contradiction, it was a feature. It reminded everyone watching that beneath the gold leaf and chiseled stone, Persia's kings held absolute power, and they weren't afraid to use it slowly. It was calculated. Consider this. Artaxerxes II didn't flay Mithridates alive in the capital square. He didn't order a gladiatorial-style spectacle. That would have been crude, loud, and far too quick. No, he ordered something that took 17 days. Something that wouldn't splash blood across marble or require a speech. He let nature do it. And while Mithridates rotted in a swamp, Persia continued to burn incense in its temples, continued to write hymns in praise of order and balance, continued to teach that Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, guided the empire's hand. That's the brand. Justice through spectacle, mercy through selectivity, divinity that doesn't flinch at decay. So long as it makes a point. You can't call it hypocrisy. Hypocrisy assumes shame. Persia had none. They understood what modern PR firms still pretend not to. That control isn't about hiding your violence. It's about directing it well, making it memorable, keeping it just rare enough that people wonder if it's legend, but just real enough that they never test it. Scaphism was the whisper that backed every royal decree. You could read the king's orders in 3 languages, etched in granite with perfect symmetry. But between the lines, you could hear the buzzing of flies. And if you ever doubted it, someone in your family knew someone who had seen the boats. That's the brilliance of it. Persia didn't hide its cruelty in dungeons. It floated it in water. It didn't shout. It rotted publicly. But branding is tricky, because the Persians weren't the only ones watching. Their enemies noticed. Their rivals recorded. The Greeks, brilliant writers, bitter enemies, picked up the scent and ran with it. Historians like Plutarch told the story of Mithridates, not as a warning, but as a condemnation. They used Scaphism to paint the Persians not just as tyrants, but as degenerates. Too polished to be trusted. Too wealthy to be human. Capable of poetry and honey-drenched executions in the same breath. And that stuck. When Alexander the Great finally invaded Persia a few decades later, he burned Persepolis not just to win the war, but to destroy the image. To wipe the smug stain of dignity off the face of an empire that had long tried to rule by elegance and terror in equal measure. Scaphism was never the main reason, but it didn't help. History has a way of highlighting what you'd rather forget, and Scaphism is unforgettable. Even now, over 2,400 years later, the name Mithridates survives only because his death was so unnecessary, so slow, so creatively horrifying, that a historian had to write it down just to process what he'd heard. And the empire that orchestrated it? Still famous, still studied, still celebrated in museums and textbooks and documentaries narrated in deep, reverent tones. But always somewhere in the footnotes, the boats. That's Persia's problem. You can be the land of milk and honey, but if you drown a man in it, the world remembers that too. History rarely remembers the screaming. It remembers the kings, the treaties, the lineages, the battles with their clean dates and dramatic conclusions. It remembers names carved in stone and royal decrees that somehow managed to survive centuries of war, fire, and rot. But when it comes to the real blood, the soft tissue, the slow unraveling of a man's sanity inside a wooden coffin full of milk and flies, those details don't usually make the cut. And yet, somehow, Scaphism did. Why? Because someone was there. Someone watched. Someone took notes. Someone whispered it in the right ear. And someone, eventually, decided it was worth writing down. Let's start with the name you already know. Plutarch. Greek. Historian. Biographer. Philosopher. And, crucially, not Persian. He lived centuries after Mithridates died, but he documented the horror as part of his life of Artaxerxes, one of the only surviving ancient sources that explicitly mentions Scaphism by name. Plutarch wasn't guessing. He wasn't theorizing. He claimed to have read Persian sources, likely court records or secondary documentation kept by scribes in the Achaemenid administration. These weren't bedtime stories. These were state archives. Bureaucratic receipts of suffering. In his account, he describes the punishment with cold precision. They take 2 boats framed to fit and exactly answer each other, in which, having laid down the malefactor, they put the other boat over him and fasten them together, his head, hands, and feet being left outside. They then offer him food, and if he refuses to eat, they force it down his throat. After this, they pour honey and milk into his mouth and all over his body and expose him to the sun. The honey attracts the flies, and in this manner, he dies at last in corruption and crawling with vermin. That's not legend. That's documentation. But let's pull back the curtain. Where did Plutarch get this from? Who was watching? Because if we accept that this punishment actually occurred, and by all accounts it did, then that means someone, maybe several people, stood close enough to see the boats, smell the decay, watch the insects swarm, and then report the timeline. And that raises a disturbing truth. Scaphism wasn't just tolerated by the empire. It was observed, managed, chronicled. Let's talk about the scribes. The Persian court was full of them. Literate men trained in multiple languages, responsible for recording taxes, battles, royal births, and legal punishments. They were the hard drives of empire. Nothing major happened without being put into ink or carved into clay. If Mithridates was sentenced formally, and we believe he was, it would have gone into the record. And if his punishment was meant as a deterrent, then the details wouldn't have been kept private. they would have been used, which means someone in a position of power likely ordered it recorded. It wasn't enough to punish Mithridates. The court wanted others to know how it happened. The method, the length, the outcome, his name. This is where it gets complicated. Because records don't survive just because they exist. They survive because someone preserved them, protected them, carried them forward across centuries. And that means someone believed this was worth remembering. But what about everyone else? How many cases of Scaphism never made it into the scrolls? How many anonymous bodies were left to rot, forgotten the moment they collapsed in the sun? How many were discarded in rivers, or picked apart by animals, or dumped in swamps never mapped? Plutarch gives us one name, Mithridates. One. That's not because he was the only one. That's because he was the most politically useful one to preserve. His story served a narrative. He was a soldier who spoke out of turn and paid the price. He became a tool for kings and critics alike. A symbol of arrogance, of royal vengeance, of the terrifying power of speech. But you don't invent Scaphism for one man. You don't build an entire method of death, complete with a feeding system, an insect timetable, and a two-boat construction blueprint for a one-off. This was a known punishment. Rare, yes, but not singular. And if Mithridates was the only one we remember, then we must ask, who are the ones we don't? Maybe a bureaucrat who embarrassed the king during a tax dispute. Maybe a noblewoman who whispered the wrong opinion in the wrong bed. Maybe a merchant whose private letters suggested sympathy with a rival city. We will never know, because no one recorded their names. Their pain mattered only as long as it frightened someone. Once the lesson faded, so did the memory. But somewhere, scattered across half-lost documents, broken tablets, oral stories swallowed by time, those other victims existed. And in the margins of history, there were witnesses. Let's talk about the guards. You don't leave a man between boats in the wild without supervision. Someone had to clean the area, force the feedings, keep flies from overwhelming the face too early. Someone had to check the pulse, note the vomiting, write down the number of days he lasted. Who were they? Not royal elites, not poets, likely soldiers, or prison staff, or assistants from the temple who had drawn the short straw and now spent their afternoons pouring milk into a man's mouth while his teeth came loose in their hands. Did they talk about it? Did they go home and describe what they saw? Did their children flinch when they heard the word boats? It's impossible to know. What we do know is this. Every punishment like Scaphism requires 3 layers to function. The authority to order it, the labor to perform it, the audience to remember it. All 3 existed, and all 3 left traces, small ones, scattered, but enough for Plutarch to piece together. So now we're left with a question. What didn't they write down? If this is the one case that survived, what happened in the other swamps? The unnamed ones. The ones where the man didn't last 17 days. Or maybe lasted 20. Or maybe died screaming a name no one could translate. Did those stories disappear because they were too common? Were too horrifying? Or because some scribe, finally, couldn't bear to dip the stylus again? We'll never know. But one did survive. Just one. One name, carved in fly wings and spoiled milk, echoing out of history like a whisper that never quite dies. And that's the only reason we're still talking about it now. Scaphism wasn't about death. It was about dominion. Not the kind scribbled in law codes or carved in granite. Those can be challenged. This was older, cruder, the kind of power that doesn't ask for compliance. It simply extracts obedience from the body, drop by drop, until nothing's left to resist. That's what Scaphism was. Not a punishment, not even a deterrent, but a demonstration. If crucifixion warned you not to break the law, and execution by sword reminded you of treason's cost, Scaphism told you something else entirely. You belong to us, and we can undo you however we please. There's a reason Artaxerxes II didn't just have Mithridates killed. He could have. In the time it took for the first ladle of milk to be poured, a guard could have ended it with a single thrust of a spear. Fast, clean, quiet, but speed wasn't the goal. Because what Artaxerxes needed wasn't resolution. He needed proof. That proof wasn't written. It wasn't negotiated. It wasn't signed in ink. It was rotting in a swamp for 17 days straight. And that was the message. Not to Mithridates, he stopped mattering the moment he spoke. The message was for everyone else. Everyone in the court who might have thoughts. Everyone in the military who might enjoy the sound of their own name a little too much. Everyone in the provinces who might be wondering how secure the king's throne really was after his brother tried to take it with Greek mercenaries. The Rot said, "Think again. Because that's the thing about this kind of power, it's not just about removing a threat. It's about turning that threat into a story. A tale with no hero, no redemption, no martyrdom, just slow degradation." Scaphism was a form of psychological warfare, disguised as execution. It didn't aim at the victim. It aimed at the collective mind of the people watching. The guards, the witnesses, the scribes, the merchants who heard the whispers, the soldiers who saw the aftermath, the neighbors of the condemned man's family who suddenly started locking their doors tighter at night. It told them, "This is what we're capable of. You've seen our palaces. You've admired our roads. Now witness the part we don't decorate." Every detail of Scaphism was an exercise in complete ownership. The force-feeding? That wasn't nourishment. It was control over the very act of survival. The honey? Not symbolism. A method of turning the body into bait, into something disgusting and irresistible at once. The insects? That wasn't nature taking its course. That was delegated cruelty. The long duration? Not accident. Not mercy. Maintenance. And what makes this so uniquely terrifying is that the victim does not resist. Not because they've accepted their fate, but because resistance is useless. You can't fight honey. You can't negotiate with ants. You can't scream loud enough to make the maggot stop. You're not facing a soldier. You're facing biology turned weapon. That's the brilliance of Scaphism as an instrument of power. It's not theatrical like drawing and quartering. It's not instant like a beheading. This mundane milk, honey, wood, time. Things you see every day. Things that seem safe. Things that remind you that death doesn't have to be dramatic to be absolute. The king didn't need to stand beside the boat. He didn't need to say a word. The swamp spoke for him. Now let's be clear. Scaphism didn't exist just to settle scores. This was imperial messaging. The same way gold coins with royal faces reinforced sovereignty, Scaphism was currency of fear. It bought silence. It bought compliance. It bought time. And it could only exist in an environment where power was unquestionable. Because Scaphism doesn't work halfway. Can't be overseen by a committee. Can't be paused for a review. It only functions when someone has complete power over another person's body, with no accountability, no appeals, and no deadline. Someone had to come up with it. That's the most disturbing part of all of this. Someone, somewhere, sometime, inside a palace or a courtroom or a rotted-out corner of a war tent, sat still, breathed slowly, and thought through the entire process. Not just, how do we kill him, but how do we ruin him completely? And not just the body, the memory, the name, the reputation, the future. It wasn't improvisation. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was an invention, the kind of method that requires trial and error, material testing, patience, and a complete absence of mercy. It wasn't the result of madness. Madness is noisy, sloppy. It screams and hacks and makes a mess because it doesn't know what else to do. Scaphism is none of those things. It's deliberate, controlled. It operates on a schedule. The feeding is consistent. The sun exposure is calculated. The victim isn't neglected, he's maintained. That's what makes it different from most torture. Most punishment is about causing pain. Scaphism is about causing slow, coordinated, unrelenting suffering that feels both eternal and inescapable. It has governance. It requires staff. Someone feeds. Someone checks breathing. Someone replaces the cloth over the eyes when it hardens with pus. It's not chaos. It's a system. So who builds something like that? Who looks at an empire, sees the need for discipline and says, We need a punishment that uses milk, honey, feces, insects, daylight, and rotting skin. Preferably all at once, over 2 weeks. It wasn't the king. Not directly. Kings issue orders. They don't sand boat planks or test insect reaction to honey-soaked wounds. No, the mind behind Scaphism was likely a court intellectual. A judge. A strategist. A man who'd read too many medical texts. Or perhaps a priest who understood the symbolism of purity turned grotesque. The kind of man who'd once written legal commentary but now watched insects with fascination. Someone who saw decay not as failure, but as opportunity. Someone who had too much time and too little empathy. And Persia had men like that. Not savages. Not barbarians. Refined thinkers. Advisors. Logicians who believed that order must be preserved at any cost. And that terror, applied correctly, could be cleaner than blood. That's the real horror of Scaphism. It wasn't rage. It was intellect. There was a process to its design, and every piece fits. The boats, containment, but exposure. Just enough confinement to restrict movement. Just enough freedom to allow the body to leak. The milk and honey. Nourishment to prolong life, but also a biological invitation. Sweetness masking digestion. The empire's luxuries turned into weapons. The sun and the swamp. Heat to inflame the flesh. Standing water to slow decomposition. Humidity to encourage insect swarms. The insects, the final army. Not trained, not armed, but efficient. Mindless, tireless, incapable of mercy. They follow scent, not politics. They do what they've always done. And that's what the architect of Scaphism must have admired. Insects don't judge. They don't ask questions. They don't flinch at screams. They break you down without thought. What better servant could an empire ask for? No pay, no rest, just decay on command. And this mind, whoever he was, must have felt satisfaction at the elegance of it all. The way it left no need for torture devices. No need for fire or iron or blades. Just the world doing what the world does, directed carefully by a hand that understood timing and biology and fear. That's not madness. That's engineering. And once it worked, once Mithridates lasted 17 days, this man likely said nothing. He didn't ask for credit. He didn't sign his name. He watched, made notes, and waited to see if anyone else ever needed to vanish without leaving a martyr behind. Because that's what Scaphism was built for, erasure without resistance. Not execution. Unpersoning. The body still moved, still moaned, but it no longer stood for anything. It was no longer defiant, no longer loyal, no longer anything except a process. No revolution could grow out of it. No movement could use it as fuel. There's no glory in watching a man rot in his own waste. There's no song for someone whose skin fell off before his heart stopped. Only silence. And the man who invented Scaphism knew that. He didn't want screams. He wanted shame. He wanted every bystander to leave the scene feeling smaller. Not just afraid of punishment, but afraid of being remembered like that. Afraid that if they ever crossed the line, history wouldn't mention their principles or their cause. It would mention their stench, their decay, the maggots. And if he thought that, he was right. Because here we are, still whispering about Mithridates. Not because he was brave or foolish or tragic, but because he lasted. 17 days. The man who created Scaphism didn't just invent a punishment. He invented a narrative filter. A way to strip humanity from memory. A way to make fear louder than legacy. And no one remembers him. No one carved his name in the record. But he exists in every step of the process. Every detail. Every calculated curve of cruelty. The boats. The honey. The long, slow leak of the human body into something that even worms hesitate to finish. That wasn't rage. That was design. That was thought. That was a mind that loved silence more than blood. And that is the most terrifying mind of all. Scaphism didn't vanish. It just evolved. It left behind its boats and its swamp and its stink, and walked quietly into new empires, new uniforms, new offices with velvet curtains and sterilized floors. Because the method may have been ancient, but the logic wasn't. The logic is eternal. You don't have to pour honey on someone's skin to destroy them. You just have to isolate them, strip away their name, their dignity, their personhood, and let the rest of the world do the devouring. Let the institution turn its back. Let nature or the public finish the job. That's the real terror of Scaphism. It wasn't the honey, it was the structure. A death made sustainable. A system of erasure so complete, the victim was still alive when it was almost done. And that system never really died. It simply grew new forms. Today, it doesn't need boats. It just needs indifference. It needs people who know something awful is happening, but don't stop it. People who look away. People who justify it. That's how you kill someone slowly now. You let them be seen and ignored at the same time. You smear them in scandal. Drown them in shame. Feed them to gossip, media, policy, or silence. And then you walk away hands clean because technically you didn't do anything. Technically, the water killed them. Technically, the insects did. It's always technical. Even now, look around. Think about how many people have vanished not because they were dangerous, but because they became inconvenient. Whistleblowers, journalists, activists, the wrong kind of thinker in the wrong kind of country. They spoke. They exposed something. They stood too close to power and said something it didn't like. And then the machine turned on. Not instantly, not loudly, not all at once, but in stages. Social discrediting, legal pressure, financial suffocation, isolation, and eventually they're forgotten. Not in one stroke, in slow fade. Their faces go from front page to footnote. Their voices go from quoted to archived. No more platforms. No more air. That's modern Scaphism. Not a swamp. A stage where the lights are slowly dimmed. And just like ancient Persia, it doesn't need to happen often. Just once in a while. Just enough to remind everyone watching. You can go from essential to expendable if you say the wrong thing at the wrong time in front of the wrong man. That's how fear works when it's efficient. You don't need mass arrests. You need a single lesson. Done well. Remembered deeply. That's what Mithridates was. Not a man. Not a soldier. A demonstration. The process worked so well it still works. We just don't call it Scaphism anymore. We call it administrative action. Or national security. Or disgraced. Or accidental. The boats have changed. But the insects are still there. They just wear different uniforms. Deadlines. Non-disclosure clauses. Gag orders. You think the buzzing's gone because you don't hear it. That's the trick. The noise now is digital, legal, professional, but the intent, the same. Drag someone into a space where they can't speak, can't move, can't breathe, and then keep them there until the world moves on. And it always does. That's what Scaphism teaches you. That decay can be quiet. That you don't need chains if you can convince someone they've already lost. And the people watching, they learn. Just like the Persians did. They learn how to sit still, how to speak safely, how to tell the difference between boldness and suicide, and they pass that down. Fear is inherited, generation to generation. The story might change, but the lesson doesn't. Don't draw attention. Don't boast. Don't claim more than you're allowed. Keep your thoughts in your mouth and your mouth in a line. Because you've seen what happens. You've heard the stories. And no one wants to rot between the boats. Not in 401 BCE. Not now. Not ever. And so it continues. A punishment that was supposed to be a one-time spectacle becomes a template. The milk is gone. The honey's gone. The wooden shell is gone. But the machinery of slow erasure remains. And maybe the worst part is that it works better now. No swarm of flies. No guards dragging you into the sunlight. Just policies, protocols, time, and you dissolve, efficiently, cleanly, without rot or fanfare, until you forget who you were, until others do too, until the last person who knew your name starts using past tense. Because nothing says power quite like getting the world to do your dirty work for you, quietly, willingly, one whisper at a time. This is how it ends. Not with fire, not with thunder, not with the defiant last words of a martyr. No rising music, no sword raised skyward, just the sound of flies, The low, thick hum of hunger with wings. This is where Scaphism finishes what it started, turning a man into meat. Mithridates doesn't die with dignity. He doesn't even die like a man. He dies like an offering. A wet thing, no longer recognizable, no longer anything. The guards stop visiting. The swamp stops rippling. Even the insects seem bored now. They've had their feast. What's left is a shape. A leaking outline of what used to be a person. You could count the days, but no one really knows. 17, maybe longer. That's how long it took. And the Persians were proud of that. Not because of the suffering, but because of the process, the precision, the discipline of a death that obeyed its design. Scaphism wasn't chaos. It was order, executed perfectly, and that's what makes it worse. A beating is rage. A stabbing is panic. This was something else. This was poetry written in blood and bacteria. And when it was over, there was no funeral. No moment of silence. The man whose mouth had once spoken treason was now quiet. Permanently. And the empire thrived. The people learned. They whispered more carefully. The border held. And the next time someone questioned the throne, they remembered the man in the boats. The man who drowned in milk and madness. Mithridates was gone. But his absence had power. And that's the real story here. Not just the death. Not just the horror. But what it was for. This wasn't punishment. It was performance. Scaphism wasn't about pain. It was about making an example. An unforgettable one. A message carved into the collective brain of a nation. This is what happens when you challenge the hand that feeds you. And guess what? That message still gets delivered today. Not with boats, no. With silence. With slow deletion. With strategies that don't leave bruises. Just empty chairs. Still happening. In workplaces. In governments. In courts. In the corners of the world that call themselves civilized. We like to think we're past it. That we've evolved. But the truth is, we've just outsourced the cruelty. We've streamlined it. Bureaucratized it. Wrapped it in protocol and smiled for the cameras. But ask the whistleblower who vanished. Ask the journalist whose name you used to hear. Ask the political prisoner in a cell no one visits anymore. The process didn't end. It just got cleaner. And you, dear viewer, dear reader, dear late-night truth seeker, you're part of this. Every time you scroll past the headlines, every time you say, "It's not my business," every time you flinch and move on when someone speaks too loudly in the wrong room, that's how the system keeps winning. Not by brute force, by making you feel like watching is enough, by convincing you that caring is enough. But it's not. Not anymore, because if history teaches us anything, it's that every empire needs its boats. And when they run out of criminals or rebels or scapegoats, they'll come for whoever's left. Whoever's watching. Whoever's still breathing and still not speaking. So here's the call. Not to arms, but to awareness, to discomfort, to memory. Remember Mithridates. Not because he was a hero. He wasn't. Not because he deserved better. Maybe he didn't. But because what happened to him worked. It silenced generations. Taught obedience. Perfected cruelty. And if we forget it, if we let ourselves believe we're too evolved for this kind of brutality, it'll come back in forms we won't recognize until it's too late. The swamp won't always look like a swamp. Sometimes it'll be an inbox, a locked door, a closed courtroom, but the goal will be the same, to dissolve someone slowly while the world watches and does nothing. You're not helpless, you're just lulled. This series wasn't designed to scare you into nightmares. It was designed to wake you up. To remind you that behind every ancient horror is a modern one in disguise. That the real monsters aren't in museums. They're in meetings, on boards, in back rooms, planning the next version of Scaphism for a world that thinks it's immune. Don't fall asleep. Don't tune out. And whatever you do, don't let yourself become part of the quiet crowd that lets the next Mithridates rot while pretending they don't smell it. You made it to the end. You read the rot. You faced the filth. Now go do something with it. Speak up. Push back. Ask questions that ruin the party. And above all, don't forget. Because memory is the only thing that makes sure the boats stay empty. For now, subscribe, share, stay aware. The past isn't dead. It's just rebranded. And it's watching to see if you're paying attention.